This terrible case shocked the whole of Great Britain with its inhumanity. The famous writer disappeared without a trace, and the police had no leads. It soon became clear that they were dealing with a cruel and unjust crime, the details of which could shock anyone. Helen Elizabeth Bailey was born in 1964 in the small English village of Ponteland. She grew up there and graduated from school. From an early age, the girl loved to keep diaries, describing in them almost everything that happened around her. After school, Helen went to study in London. At first, she wanted to become a forensic scientist and even got a degree in physiology. However, after postgraduate study and practice at the London Teaching Hospital, she decided that such work was not suitable for her. Helen wanted her activities to be related to creativity. Soon the future writer really had such an opportunity. Helen took part in the creation of several famous cartoon characters, including Garfield. She also worked on characters for Nintendo games. In 1987, she met Johnson Field, the head of a licensing company that worked with such famous brands as Snoopy, Garfield, and others. After some time, they started dating, and in 1996 they got married. After the wedding, they bought a large house in a prestigious area of London. Around this time, Helen began writing short stories that would later form the basis of her famous book series. In 2008, she released the first book in the series, The Crazy World of Electra Brown, which subsequently brought the writer widespread popularity among teenage girls. Over the next 2 years, Helen wrote 4 more books in the series. In 2010, she was nominated for an award given to the author of popular teen books. In total, she published 22 books during her career. It seemed that the couple had a happy and carefree future. But in February 2011, an unexpected tragedy occurred. The couple were vacationing in Barbados, and one day Helen's husband drowned at sea. These events actually broke Helen. After 15 years of marriage, she couldn't imagine what to do next. She later wrote that she could not hold back her tears almost every day when she left the house. To cope with her grief, she started writing a personal blog in which she shared her thoughts and experiences. Helen also joined a Facebook group of bereaved people. It was there, in October 2011, that the writer met Ian Stewart. A man recently lost his wife and was raising 2 sons, 15 and 18 years old, alone. They communicated for a long time, and at some point sympathy arose between them. In the end, they decided to meet in person, went to a movie, had dinner, and walked in the park. Even though the date went well, Helen decided that she was not yet ready for a new relationship. Ian treated this with understanding, and they continued to communicate on the internet. But soon the couple saw each other again, and during one of their walks, Helen realized that she did not want to lose this man. Since then they started dating, and at some point decided to move in together. They bought a new house to live together. As Helen was uncomfortable living with her new lover in the house she once shared with her now deceased husband, Ian sold his old house for £500,000, and he and Helen bought a new one for £1.5 million, where they began their life together. Stewart's sons also lived with them. For the next 5 years, the couple's relationship only grew stronger, and Helen wrote that life was really starting to get better. She published several more books, including her first work aimed at an adult audience. In the book, she actually reflected her journey from a state of complete loss and endless grief to new happiness. Everything was going really well, and Helen was already discussing her plans for the upcoming wedding with her friends. However, in April 2016, the unexpected happened. The woman disappeared while going for a walk with her dog, and her disappearance became known after Ian Stewart called the police. This call seemed strange to the police. It seemed that the man could not remember any identifying characteristics of the woman with whom he had been in a relationship for 5 years. The operator asked him to give Helen's height, phone numbers, and eye color. Stewart could not remember any of this. He couldn't even tell her date of birth. According to him, Helen left a note in which she asked to give her time to be alone and not to try to contact her. She was supposedly going to go to their cottage in the town of Bolsters. However, the writer never appeared there. The men also could not give the exact address of the cottage that he and Helen owned together. The police combed the cottage, but there was no sign of Helen there. The writer also had a house in Kent, but she did not appear there either. The police had no other leads, so the search essentially stopped. It wasn't until April 16, 5 days after Helen's disappearance, that anything interesting happened. Her smartphone briefly connected to Wi-Fi this morning at her cottage in Kent. This led police to believe the woman was okay and had indeed arrived at her home. At the same time, the police discovered that the writer's bank account had received requests to withdraw money. This could also indicate that everything is fine with her, but for some reason she does not want to get in touch. Her credit card was also used several times. However, the police remained skeptical about everything that was happening, and every day I looked more and more closely at Ian Stewart as a suspect. His behavior turned out to be strange from the very beginning. He didn't even know the date of birth of the woman with whom he had lived for 5 years. In subsequent interviews, he also could not remember almost any details of the day Helen disappeared. And the strangest thing is that he told the police that he accidentally lost the note she left. As for these interviews that Yang gave to journalists, they were filled with emotional speeches and tears. The man said that he could not imagine his future life without Helen. I approached her with requests to return home. He even promised to bring her beloved dog if she asked, just to see her alive and unharmed. Against the backdrop of all this, his actions several months after the disappearance of the writer looks extremely strange. I went on holiday to Spain for 2 weeks. They planned this trip together with Helen, having purchased tickets in advance. Relatives and acquaintances of the writer, who continued to live with a heavy burden of ignorance, were outraged by this act. How could a man who just a few days ago, in tears, begged Helen to return home, go on vacation to another country? For the police, this step was just another confirmation that they should dig deeper towards Ian. On July 11, exactly 3 months after the writer disappeared, detectives came to his home and arrested Ian Stewart. All this was filmed on camera. When the charges were read out to him, the man's leg was knocked down and he sat down on the steps. According to investigators, he killed Helen Bailey in order to take possession of her property and savings, of which there were many. When questioned at the police station, Stewart denied any wrongdoing while detectives combed their home and surrounding area. And these searches bore fruit. On July 15, Helen Bailey's body was discovered in a cesspool on the property of their home. Next to the woman's body was her beloved dog. Medical experts determined that the woman died from strangulation, but they were never able to determine whether the writer was alive at the time when she was thrown into the pit. The police had already searched the house and area several times, but they simply did not see this hole. The fact is that the Stewart parked Helen's Jeep directly above the pit. With an impressive array of evidence in hand, investigators tried to obtain a confession. During the interrogation, they laid out everything the police had in front of Yan, but the man just sat with a lost look and did not answer questions. The detectives had one more question to answer. If Stewart killed Helen for personal gain, why did he wait 5 long years? The answer turned out to be too obvious. In 2019, Helen left a will, according to which all her property and savings should be transferred to relatives and a close friend. However, in 2014, she changed the document to include Stewart's name. Now he was to receive most of her money and property. Thus, in the event of Helen's death, the Stewart would become the owner of savings, assets and properties totaling approximately £5 million. This huge figure would allow him to live in luxury and not deny himself anything. Soon, medical experts discovered another creepy fact. For several months, Ian gave Helen sleeping pills, which he bought for himself for the prescription from a doctor. The woman noticed that something was happening to her, as evidenced by several search queries on the internet. She wondered why she always felt sleepy. One day, the man mixed her with a large amount of the drug, after which he ended her life and hid her body in a hole. Then he began to gradually withdraw money from her bank account to their joint one, and also tried to sell one of the houses that Helen owned, but without her presence he could not do it. Ian Stewart's trial began in January 2017. Instead of admitting his guilt, he came up with a frankly ridiculous story in an attempt to avoid punishment. According to him, Helen and her dog were actually kidnapped by two men named Nick and John. They allegedly demanded a ransom of £500,000, and Stewart did not report this to the police out of fear that they might kill Helen. Of course, no one believed this story. On February 22, 2017, the court found him guilty of the murder of Helen Bailey and sentenced him to life. The offender will have the opportunity to apply for early release only at the age of 90 years. Immediately after this, detectives began investigating the suspicious death of Stewart's ex-wife, who died in 2010. Now law enforcement agencies admit that the man could also have been feeding her drugs for a long time, until the poor woman had an epileptic seizure. Moreover, it will be difficult to prove his guilt. The woman was cremated. Despite this, the police and the court continued to delve into the case. The Stewart was formally arrested on suspicion of murdering his wife. In any case, this ruthless and calculating monster will spend the rest of his life in prison. His sons, who had no idea what their father had done, are now forced to live with this heavy burden. This story shows us how low a person can go in pursuit of wealth. Helen Bailey just wanted to improve her life after the death of her husband and get rid of the endless grief. For several years she thought she had succeeded. The writer had no idea that the man she loved with all her heart was initially planning to kill her and rob her.